systems, that's going to happen anyway. The task is to design a sort of a better definition of what the state that the control system should try to achieve. And that's where the challenge lies. Exactly.
Right.
Okay.
I think there's a different... sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of going back to this hierarchy of selves and all these things that I was briefly mentioning. So having goal to maintain homeostasis per se is not a bad thing. The question is, what is the scale of the self to which that goal will be applied? And if you can ensure, I mean, just like that cancerous cell example in whatever Levin's papers, and not just his papers, it was, but basically like cancerous cell becoming dangerous when its notion of self reduces in scale spatially, just to itself, so it like single cell eats everything around. And also it becomes shorter in time because it doesn't understand that once it kills the organism, it will die itself. So maybe expanding the scale time and space-wise and making sure somehow that whatever system it is, it takes into account several scales. If it's completely not taking care of itself, it's not good either. There should be some regularization weight on the homeostasis objective at different scales. But then the tough problem is how do you lump the selection problem? How do you choose regularization weights? I have no idea.
I think what I was going to say is sort of what you said in a very different way, which is the sort of level of abstraction. Is it? I hear an echo. I think it's working. The level of abstraction that we're collecting data to train AIs at is just not the right one for thinking about individualistic goals. Like we tend to talk about an AI as though it's an individual agent, sort of homologous or something to an individual human, but it's a bunch of like mostly teenage boys on Reddit that are averaged into like that. That's what we have as AI right now. That's a collective. That's not an individual. So I think we need to be the main level of abstraction that we should be thinking about for AI is on an individual human. It's a collective of a human. And I don't think we have figured out as a society or a society of societies how to manage collective agency and collective intelligence. So like those are the problems that I'm interested in, and the models of societal governance that favor good individual health, but also collective health and collective rights, collective agency.
Excellent. Maybe to bounce off of this and some of the things that we've heard from you, and just for those of you, you haven't seen this, but this is the word cloud that is popping up from our discussion so far, is the notion, I think, of alignment, which is probably also important to take into account here, because alignment somehow assumes, this is the definition of alignment, that we want the AI systems to behave in a way that matches certain standards of value and our ethics that we as humans value. Now the issue is that that's a huge assumption that we even agree on those. And so how do we talk about alignment if there's no consensus amongst humans on what are the human values or the standards of ethics that need to be addressed?
I'm a bit jaded on the term alignment. I think we should just stop talking about alignment as much. I think we've basically solved alignment. We've aligned AI to, rich tech billionaires in Silicon Valley. We have techniques that work pretty well for alignment. There are other problems that are more important.
So I think the question of like whose intentions or whose goals should the align respond to is connected to the question of democracy, and that's connecting to what Tegan was talking about. So if we had well-functioning democracies, they should be the machinery to come up with what is right and wrong, or at least what is wrong, okay? So we don't want to tell you what to do, but at least what not to do. That's what laws are about. So I think we should look not at the AI to answer this question, but humans, maybe with the help of AI, as a tool, need to come up with, okay, what is it that we consider acceptable or not? And maybe it's going to be different from different countries. Ideally, we kind of harmonize for the world, but there's going to be differences. But now, here's the issue. Even if we're able to write down in natural language what is some sort of constitution or, consensus about what is not acceptable from a machine to do, there's a problem of over-optimization of whatever those rules that we put down. So think about corporate lawyers working for big tech. This is happening right now. And, or think about, fossil fuel companies or any kind of company actually. You have teams of lawyers that are looking at the laws and trying to find loopholes. So what does that mean? Well, that means they will do things that are legal, but actually go clearly against the intention of the law. But because it's written in natural language, it's not mathematics, there's a gray zone, and they can just navigate that and find something that doesn't really conform to the intention of the legislator, but is going to allow them to make money more easily than if they were to just respect the intention. And that is a problem not just for our societies and corporates, lawyers and so on. It's a problem because the same tactic can be used by AI that would pretend that it's doing the things we want, but actually self-preserve itself in ways that could be dangerous for us.
I mentioned this on another panel recently, but I just wanted to note that this is a very North American and pretty specifically US-centric way to interpret law. It's not that common in Europe, as I understand, or Asia, where the spirit of the law is much more the kind of object of interest that people litigate about. And it really comes directly from stealing indigenous lands, the way the legislation was made to favor large companies, large landowners, to be able to take lands from people who owned them already. That didn't used to be legal, even in North America, and it was made legal for profit. So this is like really baked into the foundation of...
You mean the laws were designed in the first place to have loopholes?
The laws were designed in the first place to have loopholes. Well, they're not even loopholes. This is by design to favor
but there are
for-profit
loopholes
companies.
if you consider like the
beautiful
intentions of the whatever
the American people's
some of
democracy,
the Constitution.
sure, yeah.
Like all men are created equal or something like this.
Right.
First men, but first at the time when they were writing this, you had indigenous people, you had black people who didn't have any of these rights, and they were writing these words and thinking they were honest.
But the loophole problems there in Europe too.
Oh, sure. I didn't mean to say, that, we have any perfect legislation or model for doing this, just that, I don't know, the US one is particularly bad in the specific respect of favoring for-profit companies over the collective interests.
Well, no, I would just say that, no matter how that we phrase the law, I think what Yoshua is saying is that we ourselves are pretty, or lawyers are pretty good at finding the loopholes. Well, AI is going to be really good, especially if there's big money in finding those loopholes.
Yeah. There's some theoretical work in economics about what's called contract theory that basically says, in general, it is impossible to write, even using a formal language, a set of rules that guarantee that a subcontractor will do what the contractor wants. And the reason is simply that the world is too complicated and there's like an exponential number of cases and they can't all be covered in general with a finite number of rules that go into a contract. So in other words, what we're doing when we ask AIs to do things like writing a contract, you should not do this, blah, 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 blah. But there's loopholes. There's always going to be loopholes. It's like you have to live with that reality.
So from what I'm hearing, there's a lot of all the problems that we're facing, and which is, I think, the state of the art. There are big issues to deal with. Now, if we go into specific applications, more down to earth of solving specific problems that exist, trying to improve on performances, there is at least a subfield within AI of people that believe things like embodied AI is going to be a game changer in terms of improving performances on certain tasks. So maybe I would like to hear you, and particularly also the neuroscience perspective, embodiment, and is this something that has been far too long left out of the picture and we're missing a huge part of what these systems could do if they had bodies?
I'm one of the people that strongly feels that embodiment is important for achieving true understanding. But I think my concern is that if we, the only examples we have are living things which aren't always so nice to each other. And so I think it's it's kind of like at the same time I'm a proponent of doing this, and at the same time I'm a proponent of not doing it, because I think that's when we get into the real dangers.
We need to understand how this works so that we can design machines that maybe don't have some of the things we do and are going to be useful and good for us.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what Irina said is kind of the right path. We'd like them to have defining their goals at a scale which we're happy with. So, you know, all of humanity is part of it, as well as local groups are part of it, so nobody's left out of the average, or, you know, as well as perhaps protecting itself, because you don't want the toaster to explode. So we have to understand how the kinds of, you know, how one turns goals into actions, essentially, so that we can craft them carefully. But I think what you just said is going to be the problem. There's always going to be a loophole. And how do you protect against that? Can you make a self-regulating system that prevents itself from exploiting?
Exactly. I don't think you can design rules, or, I mean, rules will be part of it. They create constraints, but there should be also some properties of the system that will stay within constraints, but they also, there could be like different kind of dynamics. There could be like, I don't know, like the meditation on Moloch kind of stuff, right? There were all the scenarios of how things can go wrong. And yeah, it depends on, yeah.
But to the question of scale, or like, we have a very large self-regulating system, a very complex, multi-agent one that has been sustainable for like millions of years. And we humans are destroying it very effectively. So making better tools to enable us to favor our own sort of selfish interests on the planet without having a scale that includes the planet, when we have, you know, like 85% of species have gone extinct in the last, since humans have dominated the planet. Like, this is a very large crisis that if we don't take into account, this is just going to be a runaway, unsustainable system.
Sorry, in defense of humans, I mean, at least recently.
How can you even, Paul? Come on.
At least
It depends which
at least
humans.
recently, we have at least acknowledged the fact that we're doing this, and we are making some effort. Well, no. Well, the bar may be on the floor, so Greta may not be pleased, but at least we have Greta. No, but at least we have people. I mean, I think my kid and his generation is probably going to be better behaved, and so on and so on. I think the fact that we've become aware, now that we've come to the point where actually we're starting to see the effects of our sort of traditional selfish, destructive behavior, I think we have acknowledged that the system is kind of self-correcting in some ways.
Yeah.
Hopefully not by...
Maybe selfish behavior is actually lack of intelligence.
I think there's
just like the
such a-
cancerous cell.
yeah.
But there's such a disconnect between what we think about and what we actually do in the world. Like this Jevons paradox, I don't know if anybody's heard of this, but this is basically like you make something more efficient and that doesn't reduce its effects. So the example is SUVs, it increases it. So like you increase efficiency of cars. We did this in the 90s. All the cars are massively fuel efficient compared to the ones in the 80s. There are many times more cars on the road now. All of the cars are bigger per capita. We are consuming more every year. We are not reducing our impact on the planet. We have this collective consciousness that like we want to be nice to the planet, but it's not actually happening.
I want to go back to the question of loopholes, and the question is there, something that can be done? So Stuart Russell wrote a NeurIPS 2016 paper and his book in 2019 called Human Compatible, where he basically gives the roadmap for solving this problem, and it's connected to my talk. So if the AI maintains a honest distribution about our intentions. So remember, there's a problem between the letter of the law, or whatever instructions we give, and the spirit of the law. The AI knows the letter, and it can only infer what was the intention. And so that inference is going to be, with a lot of uncertainty, because it may not be sure what we really intended. So the corporate lawyers are trying to find one interpretation that works for them, and probably are not going to work for us. The other option is to maintain all of the interpretations in some, at least in principle way, and say, well, if it's like what I talked about, so if any of the interpretations say that I shouldn't be doing this thing, then and to be conservative, I shouldn't be doing it, right? So the AI is going to be conservative. If it's not sure that it's going to do something that we consider really, really bad, then it shouldn't do it, period. And so that's a sort of a cautious and humble AI. That's the sort of thing we need. And in principle, we could design machines that do that estimate that uncertainty. So that's why being Bayesian is so important.
Excellent. So maybe, unless you want to come from, so in the interest of time, because I also know Yoshua, you need to have a flight to catch.
Oh my God.
So we're opening the questions now to the floor. So
Yeah.
just briefly say who you are. And
Okay. I'm Luis Pessoa. I'm a neuroscientist from the University of Maryland, College Park. So it's been a fascinating discussion, but I wanted to go back to something that has already been touched upon, which is in thinking about human intelligence, perhaps animal intelligence in general, we really have to think, well, in my view, I should say, obviously, that we really need to incorporate constructs such as motivation and emotion, valence, approach, withdrawal. And so if we do that and move in that direction, for the reasons that were already discussed by the panel, but maybe it could elaborate a little bit, it would seem to be disastrous for us to aim for better AI being closer to human or even animal intelligence. So I
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I tend to think a lot more about ecosystem intelligence, so like forest intelligence, let's say. These are the kinds of cooperative systems that have favored the most biodiverse and productive by most metrics, like productive in terms of compounds that are helpful for humans today, like, you know, anti-cancer agents, magic glues, all kinds of random material science stuff, but also productive in the sense of creating cool, amazing yeah. Sorry, go
Actually,
ahead.
Yeah, let me, just one thing, just if we put that together, emotion, motivation, cognition, all intertwined with action embodied, then I think that the answer is obvious. We will self-destruct very quickly.
unless, well, that's why there was a suggestion about homeostasis-driven intelligence, like if the agents are vulnerable and can be hurt or killed. And they do have emotions because those are kind of signals from their bodies, if they embody it, or in general sense, it doesn't have to be like a physical body, it could be whatever, virtual. But if there is some notion of this like strong negative reward, and they are vulnerable somehow, then actually it may be not a bad thing to be quote unquote embodied with emotions and actions and so on, because well, try to maintain their homeostasis and try not to, well, being smart, hopefully smarter than us, they may try not to destroy the environment because that will have a bad effect on them. But good question, how do you do that? I don't know.
Hi, Julien Voisin, working in neuroscience and rehabilitation. I wonder, do you consider that Google or Meta or the United States of America are super intelligence? And how does that impact your thought process?
To some extent, and we see the results.
Yeah, I mean, I would say they're AIs. I don't think they're super intelligent, or they're pretty dumb, but they are collective intelligence.
Well, they're trying to achieve goals that a single person can't achieve, so they're kind of superhuman.
That's true, yeah. I think most people define superintelligence as something like better at humans across every category, but yeah.
Hello. My name is Andrew Zielinski, and unlike anybody else in this audience, I am not from the field of neuroscience. I've spent 15 years working in Silicon Valley as a marketing person and a legal contracts person.
Sorry.
Okay, good, another American here.
Absolutely not, and I think I've got a slightly different take on this whole thing. What brought me here today was wondering about what the day-to-day impact of artificial intelligence is right now. I teach in vocational studies. I teach business, technology, international marketing, etc. And more my students are coming in with papers generated by AI. And I ask myself a question, is this a threat or is this an opportunity? I see it as an opportunity, but how to explain it? So where are we now? And one thing that hit me was what Irina was saying about the example in the cancer, right? And then if the AI is self-interested. Once the cancer is dead, does it kill itself? My suggestion to you as a product manager is program into it a life cycle expectancy.
Yeah, that's what, again, I'm just quoting those papers about making vulnerable agents that can be, well, hurt, killed, or whatever, but they have this strong negative feedback possibility, so then that will force them to incorporate different scale of homeostasis,
Yeah.
or else.
I think that from that perspective, if you look at what you're programming into your AI, you're going to program something that's perhaps more practically oriented. Here we're thinking, are we trying to make AI human? And is that really the end result? Because then I have to question, what is the definition of intelligence and how artificial is artificial?
I think you're making a really good point about making the thing that we actually want, and especially making the thing that different communities want. Different communities want different things. Different people want different things. I just wanted to make a plug for the FACT conference. Like the applications that we're talking about are pretty close to us, like let's say in a classroom or something like that. But FACT does a great job of bringing in community organizers from various places who talk about like who are the kind of subjects of AI, who is experiencing this on a daily basis, like when you go to the airport, when you go in the metro system, is your face being registered? Is that being used, if you wore a t-shirt that is anti-government, are you going to be flagged at the airport and not be able to leave now? These kinds of surveillance applications of AI are extremely widespread, extremely, extremely widespread. And I didn't mean to focus solely on that one, but it's very important for the field, I think, to pay attention to how are these things actually being used? Is that actually what we want?
Thank you. And the last thing that I wanted to share, too bad your colleague decided to walk out because I wanted to talk about the legal loopholes.
Unfortunately, I think Yoshua had to catch a flight, right?
He had a flight.
Yeah.
Oh, he had a flight, okay.
It's not you.
We'd like to talk about legal loopholes as being a manipulation of something that society created. Having a legal background, I will argue that what is legislated ends up being a result of an open debate process. And sometimes what's legislated is imperfect because society has reached the point where it has only an imperfect decision. Think of Roe versus Wade, right? So jurisprudence is all about making those adjustments. Is it about legal loopholes? It's about advocating.
Maybe we can take a quick answer to this because
Yeah.
there are more people waiting in the back.
Well, I'm done. Okay, merci.
Okay, so maybe a quick response if you have one. Please.
I would just take that more as a comment. You have the legal expertise. I think there are people of that mindset, and that's great, but I do think there are also people of the finding loopholes mindset.
Thank you.
Yes. Next question.
Hi, I'm Nikhil. I'm doing neuroimaging research in Parkinson's at McGill. My question is on talking about regulation of AI. There seem to be two camps. One thinks we should regulate the fundamental research itself, while other people think we should regulate applications, not the research itself. I was curious where you guys stand and why.
I can maybe speak to that a little bit. So in the West, those are basically the North American versus the European models of governance. So the EU-AI Act, for instance, is very applications-based, whereas the US tends to be more, let's say rights-based, like the AI Bill of Rights. I think we need both. We need aspects of both because AI is sort of a cross-cutting technology. It's not purpose-built. It's not like a machine. A lot of the legislation that both the EU-AI Act and the US are drawing on are for regulation of machines. Machines are physical objects that sit in a room and they can be replicated, so you can sort of think of them as having more than one instance. But there are things about AI that I'm sure all of you, could name 100 of them that are very different from traditional instantiated machines. So one thing is just the relational nature of data. So the fact that if you learn something from an AI about a specific enough subgroup, and there's only like 3 members of that subgroup, you've now de-anonymized the data for those 3 members. So the relational nature of data is just not covered in the application-specific paradigm. So there are real issues of privacy and de-anonymization if you have a solely application-specific framework. But then I think you also miss out a lot of in a practical way, you miss out on a lot of existing legislation that covers the most obvious use cases for a particular thing if you're only looking at these very broad principles.
So I would say that the latter is maybe more important, though, the regulation aspect, because and it has to do with incentive structures, right? I mean, if there's big money to be made by doing something, that's exactly what people will be doing. And so, and I think what we need a bit of a kind of like an antitrust type approach where we prevent, you know, the centralized power to just be centralized more. And I think one thing which I'm curious about is the fact that a lot of these AI models, particularly large language models, can't tell you why they answered the way they did. And I think there's a problem, because if we did something like actual like credit assignment, and trace back why this answer and not a different answer, it would, first of all, it would make it much easier for the reader to evaluate whether they should trust this source, or is it just the kids on Reddit, right? And also assign credit and or blame for misinformation, et cetera. So I think tagging the information in some way, where how it impacts on the responses and the product is kind of important, or we don't have accountability. And once you don't have accountability, people start behaving in all kinds of nasty ways.
A small thing about that. The UAI Act right now is debating and deliberating on something, I forget what the technical name is, but it's how is the UAI Act actually going to be interpreted in practice? And an important document in this is what are the specific legal liabilities associated with specific acts and violations of the UAI Act. So if you have commentary about that, now is the time to submit it to the UAI Act office. And I also just wanted to say about the antitrust, anti-monopoly stuff. We tried that with social media companies, and there was a lot of antitrust. We have antitrust legislation, and I'm very pessimistic now about the U.S. enacting any anti-tech antitrust because of the war with China and military interests, basically.
So how do you solve it?
I'm very pessimistic overall, to be honest. But it's not a technical problem, I don't think. You solve it by taking all the power that you can, shifting it back to people who are doing better things with it than our governments are currently. But like that's a much longer question. It's a very important question that we should be talking a lot more about. But
just a quick comment on actually another perspective and side. So while doing that, it's also kind of important not to throw baby with the bathwater, because regulations put excessively and without, I mean, like, for example, let's limit creation of models of certain size, where this number comes from, or something like, or like open source is bad. So it's very important not to stifle innovation. And free market is not such a terrible thing. I know I'm highly unpopular here. I'm from US. Sorry, guys.
I agree with like half of what you're saying so much, and the other half so much not.
There should be some kind of balance. But because if you push it to the other extreme, then consequences will be also like you. Okay, so basically you will not develop what you could have. And people sometimes say that, yeah, there is danger of AI, but it's also danger of not developing AI, which could have solved medical problem and could have saved lives. So by stopping AI, you're killing those people. So the arguments go...
ChatGPT isn't solving any medical problems, but let's go to more questions.
ChatGPT did help some people who had some kind of specific rare cases and couldn't figure out through doctors to find solution, but it's kind of, so what I'm trying to say, it's like, I don't know, there is lots of discussion, but unfortunately it's a tough problem, so it's also important to consider the other extremes that we don't want to end up in.
Not to stifle open source. I am very...
Yeah.
Questions?
Thank you.
Let's do quick questions. Okay. Maybe if you can try shorter answers, so people make sure we get lunch and also a big group photograph of everybody.
Okay, hi, Eva Portelance. I'm a cognitive scientist at HSC in Mila. So it's actually a good follow-up to some of the discussion. Just yesterday I had a conversation with a colleague in biology, and they made the analogy to the problem of cloning, in their field, and how the field sort of came together as researchers making a decision that even though there could be benefits that could be found in the future by going down that research direction, they just chose not to. And so I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of our responsibility as a scientific community beyond just like regulation and law and other entities. What is our responsibility in sort of discussing the possible directions this could go in and limiting ourselves before we get there?
Yeah, I think it's a great precedent. CRISPR as well. I think we have a terrible history with sort of collective organizing around not doing things that would be bad for us overall. But those are two success stories. I would like to see us not make, let's say, AI agents until we had a better set of incentives and understanding of the collective dynamics that we're deploying them in. I think the problem is like CRISPR, let's say, or human cloning. Those are very discrete, clear ideas. I think we have a much less clear, discrete idea of what it means to be an agent or have agency or take agency away from a person or a community. So it's harder to come together around a crisp statement when we lack that crisp statement, but I think we should be trying to find it.
Okay.
Hi, my name's Neely. I'm a software engineering student at Concordia. When Paul mentioned that, in defense of humanity, it reminded me of how all over the world we've all dealt with, whoever it may be, an ex who said the exact same thing. So in my defense, I'm learning now, or I just realized this now, and I've thought about this a lot as a society as a whole. Are we influencing our future AI systems to carry humanity's insecurities? And if we do, that will definitely worsen the damage that our society and humans have done to the earth.
Well, I think as many people have said, making, training models on the internet is not just going to produce, it's not just going to mirror the beauty. It's going to mirror the ugliness and the selfishness and the cruelty, right? And
this isn't just mirroring, though. It's going to make it like exponential.
Sorry?
It's not going to be mirroring it. It's going to make it exponential.
It might maybe make it exponential. It's going to create, and what you see just in social media, you create these little echo chambers. You just exaggerate these viewpoints to these things, you lose the middle ground. It's a bit like U.S. politics. There's just two extremes, and no one can survive in the middle. And I think by doing what we're doing, we're just exaggerating that right now to an extent which is kind of difficult. It's like imagine if village gossip exploded on actually it did on the internet. Yeah, I mean that's exactly what social media is, right? And it's not the best of us, right?
But in principle, you could also, why we're only talking about exponentially amplifying whatever like bad? It could possibly do like same thing for good stuff.
It definitely will, but it depends whose hands it falls into.
Yeah,
and who
and
runs.
imagine clear example with social media, like sometimes like a while ago, like some Facebook discussion group like atheists who blaming that religious people are so kind of intolerant and so on. And then the conversation becomes so intolerant of everyone but atheists. So even being an atheist, I say, guys, what are you doing? Everybody turns at me and yeah, so next 15 minutes, like you have to withstand a bunch of interesting comments. So you try to play Buddhist and be like a concrete wall. After 15, 20 minutes, the conversation is steered, it calms down, and then, so dynamics has changed. You're completely exhausted, and you think, if it was not me, but AI, first of all, it wouldn't be exhausted, and second, only AI can do it at scale in many such conversations. So if there is a kind of it would be like a mass psychology or mass therapy. Like, I don't know, I think society needs a CBT at scale, and AI could help. Possibly.
I agree, but sorry, I didn't really understand what I agree, society
So
needs
the
CBT,
agents,
yeah.
the language agents, if they trained on, I don't know, proper ways of steering conversations in the direction of de-escalation rather than escalation, could actually really cool the temperature quite a lot. But yeah, it's quite a big project. And if there is an army of disinformation agents, you practically have no choice but deploy an army that would be fighting that. So,
Thank you.
Okay, on the notion of army, I think we have an army of hungry people sitting all right here. So please join me in thanking our panelists once again.